What's up, Team 116? So we are on a journey through the Bible with the story series where we're flying from Genesis through Revelation. Last week we looked at the three generations that led up to establishing Israel, from Abraham through Isaac to Jacob, who became Israel. And we saw how they had to overcome their own hurdles that were keeping them from being 100% faithful. Well, one of those hurdles was showing favoritism, which unfortunately Jacob didn't quite get over and leads into this week. So check out this short video to get us started, follow the instructions on the screen, and I'll see you all on the other side.
Jacob had 12 sons, but his favorite was Joseph. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were working in the fields. Joseph's brothers resented him, and when they saw him coming, they attacked him and threw him in a well. Then they sold their brother as a slave, took off his coat, soaked it in goat's blood, and showed it to their father, tricking him into believing a wild animal had killed Joseph. Soon after, Joseph was sold to a military official in Egypt as a servant. God helped Joseph do great work, and the official was very happy with him. Joseph was very handsome, and the official's wife tried day after day to seduce him. One day, she pressured Joseph so much that he ran out of the house, leaving his coat behind. She told everyone that he tried to force himself on her. The official was furious and threw Joseph in jail. God once again helped Joseph in all he did. And eventually he was put in charge of all the prisoners. Joseph had the special ability to interpret people's dreams. One day, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, asked Joseph to interpret one of his dreams. He dreamed that 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 heads of healthy grain were eaten up by 7 heads of dried up grain. God helped Joseph interpret the dream. Egypt would experience 7 years of successful farming, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed and put Joseph second in charge of Egypt. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt looking for food. When they got there, they met with Joseph, but didn't recognize him right away. When Joseph finally told them who he was, they wept because they were sorry for what they had done. Eventually, they went and got their father Jacob and brought him back to Egypt. Joseph took care of his entire family, giving them property in the best part of the land where they lived for the rest of their lives.
For my See the Story creation, I have a giant hand hovering over someone being sold to slavery there. Obviously, these are Joseph, and someone on a throne. Now, I'll circle back around to this at the end, but how was your See the Story moment? What did you make? Well, you could say that so far we've seen the following through Genesis: how God provides for us even when we are unfaithful, how God fulfills his promises on his timing, not ours, and how God's power is so much greater than our own strengths and weaknesses. Well, this week we're going to see just how much God really does take care of us and have a plan for us, even in those moments when it really doesn't look like he's there, and especially if we stay faithful to him. Now, how many of you come from mixed families out there? Well, you would likely relate to Joseph's early years then, because Joseph was raised with his dad, his mom, 3 stepmoms, 9 stepbrothers, and 1 stepsister. It's like living in a supersized version of the Brady Bunch.
That this group must somehow form a family.
Now, somewhere along the way, it's open for debate when exactly, his mom also died, giving birth to his only full-blooded brother. So there's that also in his life. Oh, and Joseph was openly shown to be the favorite child, and that didn't go over well. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So, nobody sees anything possibly bad coming from this scenario, right? Well, among many things that increased their hatred and jealousy of Joseph, God gave him a couple dreams about the future that he shared with them about how all his family would be bowing to him one day as he takes a ruling position over them. Now, it's probably not the smartest thing to do with people who already hate you to share not just once but twice how you're going to rule over them one day, but he did. We also have to look at his family too, though. See, instead of being excited for him, for praising God for the future blessing to Joseph, or even trying to listen and understand what God meant through these dreams, they used his dreams to fuel their hatred. And that seemed to be the final straw for them, as the next thing we read is how his brothers plotted to kill him to be rid of him. But thankfully they changed their minds and sold him into slavery. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. What a nice, loving family, huh? Well, going through something like that would break a lot of people, especially a 17-year-old like Joseph was this time. But it didn't break Joseph. After he was sold to Potiphar, who was Pharaoh's captain of the guard, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. You remember how at the start of this series we were going to see better how God ties it all together? Remember from last week how God told Abraham that all peoples on earth will be blessed through him? This is one place we get to see that start happening.
Okay, it's happening!
Only Potiphar and Joseph are mentioned here, but Joseph was not his only servant. Potiphar, being captain of the guard, would have had many servants to take care of his house, prepare his meals, work his fields, take care of his wife, and so on. Through Joseph's faithfulness to God, Potiphar and all his servants were being blessed, not just materially, but by seeing firsthand the evidence of God. However, Potiphar's wife saw Joseph in a different way and wanted him to sleep with her. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Do you catch what Joseph's saying here? He's got it made. He's in control of everything, and he knows it. But when so many people would let this power go to their head and become arrogant, Joseph stays humble and faithful to both God and Potiphar, and he refuses her. In fact, day after day, she confronts him and he refuses her, until she finally plots and sets a trap for him, able to convince Potiphar that Joseph was trying to take advantage of her. In his anger, Potiphar had Joseph put in prison. Again, another situation, especially being the second in his lifetime now, that would break a lot of people, but not Joseph. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Think about what's happening here. Here you have a foreign servant who is in prison for trying to rape the captain's wife, being put in charge of all the prisoners and all the prison, to the extent that the warden did not even have to pay any attention.
It would be absolutely, totally, and in all other ways inconceivable.
How often do you hear a story like that? Well, imagine, just like Potiphar's household, how many prisoners and prison officials were there that also got to witness and experience God through Joseph. That's the greatness and faithfulness of God for someone who has been faithful to him. After some time, Pharaoh had his cupbearer and baker imprisoned with Joseph, and they were both given prophetic dreams. Joseph, through God, was able to interpret their dreams for them, revealing that in 3 days the baker would be killed by Pharaoh, but the cupbearer would be restored to his position. And Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and speak well of him to Pharaoh when he returned, in the hope that Pharaoh would then free him from his wrongful imprisonment. 3 days later, their dreams came true. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. The cupbearer, probably in his relief and excitement, forgot about Joseph, who helped him in prison. But even worse, the very next thing we read is when 2 full years had passed. Think about that. This cupbearer didn't just get caught up in the excitement and then remember Joseph later. He completely forgot about him for 2 full years. Any of you ever feel forgotten by people that you've helped or who you thought were friends? Imagine being wrongly put in prison, finally thinking this cupbearer guy is a hopeful ticket out, only to be left there forgotten for 2 more years. Again, another incident that would break a lot of people, but not Joseph. After these 2 years, Pharaoh was now getting prophetic dreams that he couldn't understand, but neither could all his magicians, wise men. But then the cupbearer, he remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him.
But you have heard of me.
So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Again, check out Joseph's humility and faithfulness here. Joseph could have easily taken the credit for it being his ability to interpret the dreams, but instead he flat out says he can't. He doesn't have the ability, but that God does. What a perfect example of how to witness for God. So Pharaoh tells him the dreams, and Joseph relays God's message that there will be 7 years of amazing harvest, but they will be followed by 7 years of devastating famine, and that he needs to prepare for it. But on top of that, God had given Joseph a plan for Pharaoh of how to prepare for it, which Joseph told him. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So think about that. Think about where Joseph has come from in his life, all he's gone through, and it's brought him to this point and his purpose, second in command of all Egypt to save the people. The harvest and famine years all came as prophesied, and Joseph was the manager of ensuring the nation survived it. And as the video at the beginning showed, this time of famine also brought Joseph and his family back together in an enormous and joyous family reunion, with his family now living in Egypt with him. But think to yourself, if Joseph was not in control of Egypt during this time, what do you think would have happened to his family during this famine? Would they have ever even met again? So I bring all this back to my see the story, because we see this presented so clearly in Joseph's life, right? There will be high moments and low moments, but God is over you through them. We also see how Joseph was faithful to God through both the low and the high moments, and God rewarded his faithfulness by blessing him in every situation. God will do the same for us if we stay faithful to him through whatever low and high moments we go through. Now, this doesn't mean that if you follow God, you're going to become an all-powerful ruler. God doesn't guarantee earthly prosperity. He does promise blessings, though, however he may choose them to be. But we also see how God has a purpose for all of us. And sometimes that includes starting at a low place through a low wilderness moment. But all these moments, if we allow him, they will shape us. They will prepare us for God to use us in incredible ways down the road. I know as I look back through my life, that's how it's worked out for me. I won't claim to always having been as faithful as Joseph in those moments, but I've tried to always trust that God's got something great lined up down the road, and he always has. Joseph himself even puts the exclamation point on this truth after Jacob dies, because his brothers are now fearful that Joseph will take revenge on them for all the problems they caused him. But Joseph said to them, Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Well, our first chunk of the journey is over as we've reached the end of Genesis. Now is your time to join the story for this week by sharing how can you relate to Joseph's life, both in the good and the bad moments. How do you feel and react when you're betrayed by family or friends or accused of things you didn't do? What are some moments in your life when you've seen God's plan at work, when you've seen his blessings come? If you're in a low moment right now, think about what might God be preparing you for on the other side of it. So stay faithful this week, and I'll see you all on the next part of our journey.